Well, I want to take this opportunity on this Monday, this Labor Day, to give you an update on Dorian and take advantage of being online because it gives us more time to really go into depth with the storm when we only have, maybe a few minutes on air. But here's the latest on Dorian. This is a 36-hour satellite and radar loop. So this starts just before Dorian made landfall here on Great Abaco Island. So for 36 hours, this storm has been churning slowly through the northern Bahamas, and over the last about 6 hours, the storm has stalled just over and just north of Grand Bahama Island. So let's zoom in, give you a little bit of a closer look. And again, you can just see that center of the storm still spinning over the Great Bahama Island and still not moving. We'll zoom in even closer, and here's the last 6 hours, and you can just see that eye wall pummeling the northern side of the island here just north of Freeport, and those rain bands continue to affect the southern tip of Florida, even from areas back towards Fort Myers and down towards Key West. We've been seeing those rain bands move in, and as we mentioned, the storm has been stationary. Here's the 9 o'clock advisory coming in, and no updates on the watches or warnings, but we do have hurricane watches extending all the way up towards Charleston, South Carolina. And I expect maybe by 11 o'clock tonight or certainly by tomorrow, those warnings will extend farther up the South Carolina and likely into the North Carolina coastline as the storm is finally starting to show maybe a few signs that it's going to get moving here as we go through the overnight. So here's the 9 o'clock information from the Hurricane Center. 140-mile-per-hour sustained winds with gusts of 165. Movement is stationary, still 25 miles northeast of Freeport on Grand Bahama Island. Here's the forecast as we go through the overnight by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So we're talking, less than 24 hours. Not much movement here as the storm will just be east of the Florida coastline. And even as we go into Wednesday afternoon, still a Category 3 storm, a major hurricane just east of Jacksonville, Florida. So you can see here that it's very slow moving, at least initially, but then it's going to start moving a little bit faster. And that is certainly some better news for us here in Hampton Roads. Forecast track carries it to the northeast, just east of Charleston by 2 p.m. Thursday, and by 2 p.m. Friday off the coast of Virginia Beach. Now notice that center line, and you don't always necessarily want to focus on the center line because the storm is large, so the impacts can be a lot greater even than the cone of uncertainty. And that cone says that the storm could be either side of that line, but notice that the line does carry it right over top or just off the coast there of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And then the storm races towards the northeast, so by 2 o'clock on Saturday, up around Halifax, Nova Scotia. Here are a lot of the other computer models. Again, very similar, but over this distance, there are a lot of questions as to whether the storm is going to be just off the coast or just a little bit inland, and it's just too early to say at this point where the storm might go. Once again, the National Hurricane Center track. This is the European model, and these are the ensemble members. So what happens when we run an ensemble? Well, we have one main computer model for the Euro that we run. That's called the operational. And what happens is we tweak the numbers just a little bit at initialization. Maybe the storm might be 5 miles per hour weaker, or maybe it's just a little bit drifting towards the north and west, and then we run the same computer model again. And we do that 50 different times, and we get 50 different outputs. And what this helps us do is just see if there's a lot of chances for wide variation, or maybe things, if all the computers agree or are fairly close, that we have a better idea of what will happen. And notice that there are a few of the ensemble members that carry the storm a little bit farther inland off that National Hurricane Center track, quite a few more towards the south and east. But again, we're talking about just a matter of miles that could make a huge difference in the impacts that we see here. And here's why. This is the latest information from the Hurricane Center. Hurricane force winds, those are winds of 74 miles per hour or higher, extend 45 miles from the center of Dorian. Now, the strongest of those winds are right in the eye wall, those big thunderstorms that surround the center of circulation with the storm. But even out 45 miles, we have hurricane force winds, and 150 miles out, we have tropical storm force winds. Most of those are here on the south and east side, but notice that we do have some of those tropical storm force winds very, very close to the Florida coastline. Now, if we carry that off towards the north and west, notice how close those hurricane force winds get to Cape Canaveral and eastern Florida. And that's why just a shift of even 10 or 20 miles can make a huge difference in the impact. And that's the same issue that we'll be dealing with the storm as it gets closer to Hampton Roads. Now, this particular computer model simulation only goes through 2 p.m. on Thursday, so we don't have that information just yet for here in Hampton Roads. But you'll notice that by 2 o'clock on Thursday, those tropical storm force winds will be very close to Cape Lookout, North Carolina, and you can carry that off towards the north and east and imagine that we could see those strong winds here in Hampton Roads. So let's go back to the European model, the Euro, the ECMWF, lots of different names for it, but it has traditionally been one of the most reliable computer models for tropical storm forecasts over the past several years. So this is one run of the European model, one model, and this is one possibility. That's why we call it gust potential with the storm. Thursday, 8 p.m., could already start to feel some of the effects of tropical storm force wind gusts down towards Cape Hatteras, and even here in Hampton Roads, 20 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts as we go into Thursday evening. Let's advance it into Friday morning, 6 a.m. Notice those winds coming in out of the northeast here through Hampton Roads. One of the issues that we could see with the storm, those winds coming in across the Chesapeake Bay, pushing waters up the Elizabeth River or the York River or the James River. Could be some issues with some tidal flooding, a little bit of storm surge, but primarily I'm concerned with maybe some tidal flooding as we get into that Friday morning high tide. Down through areas of northeastern North Carolina and especially the Outer Banks. Notice those winds coming in here out of the southeast, and even by 6 o'clock Friday morning, we talk about wind gusts around Cape Hatteras, very close to hurricane strength, and even through much of eastern North Carolina, 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts, and that would be enough to cause some issues with power lines and trees, especially through eastern North Carolina and even up towards Virginia Beach. And as we get into 9 o'clock on Friday morning, 30 to 40, maybe 50, or even close to 60 mile per hour wind gusts right along the Albemarle Sound, and maybe even over 90 mile per hour wind gusts over hurricane strength here at Cape Hatteras. And that continues into Friday afternoon, midday. Here's noon on Friday. And again, coastal areas seeing the brunt of the winds with this storm, and especially through the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And by Friday, as the center passes, we start to see those winds switch around. And I'm really concerned, especially down towards Hatteras and Ocracoke Island, that we could get some sound side flooding as those winds blow through the Pamlico Sound and even through parts of the Albemarle Sound. We could have some issues of some sound side flooding. By 3 o'clock, storm is finally starting to exit. Wind gusts start to diminish here through much of Hampton Roads. And then certainly by Friday evening, we'll be done with the storm, pushing off towards the east. Still some breezy conditions Friday evening, but things finally starting to wind down. Again, this is what one computer model is saying is the potential, and these numbers will change. The track of the storm will likely change, and we just have to watch it. It's still a little too far out to get too specific with what we can expect with the storm. As far as rainfall amounts, again, really dependent on the track of the storm. Could be talking about 4, 5, 6 inches of rain, maybe up to 10 inches of rain in some spots here through coastal Carolina. Notice the farther north and west you live, the chances for heavier rain are greatly diminished. And one thing that's working in our favor, with this being a fast-moving storm, one, it's not going to sit around for a long time, giving us those prolonged northeast winds that cause significant issues with tidal flooding, but it's also not going to allow it to produce tremendous amounts of rain like we saw with Matthew just a couple of years ago. So a fast-moving storm, certainly some benefits with it moving faster, that we won't be inundated with some of that heavy rain, but still 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 inches of rain could cause some issues with some flooding, especially through coastal Carolina, even through some of the low-lying areas of Virginia Beach or Norfolk or Portsmouth. If we get some heavy rains or a band setting up over the metro area, that could cause some issues. If we get a lot of rain over a short period of time, you know, that an inch or two of rain can cause some significant issues with some of the storm drains. If it inundates those storm drains in a very short period of time, it doesn't allow the rain to drain. So again, these are some of the potentials. These numbers will change as we go through the next few days, as we get a little bit of a finer tune on the track of the storm. So let's talk about the threats in Virginia, and this includes extreme inland parts of North Carolina as well. Some moderate threats for wind, tides and surge and rain. Tornado threat, fortunately, should be fairly low across Virginia, but we'll have to watch just for some pockets of some heavier rain. Wind issues, certainly closer to the coastline. You have bigger issues because you don't have a lot of land for that wind to blow across. If it's coming right off the ocean, you get those stronger winds because there's not a lot of friction to slow that wind down. So I do think that we will have some issues with some trees down and some power lines as we get into Thursday night and Friday morning through about midday. A little bit of a bigger threat down through eastern North Carolina. And as we get closer to Cape Hatteras, this will probably even be a significant possibility of some tides and some tidal flooding and some storm surge, especially on the backside coming in. So again, this is the latest here on Dorian. 36 hours it's been moving here through areas of the Bahamas. Fortunately for us, by the time it gets here, it'll be weaker and a faster moving system, but still I think that we will have some impacts here in Hampton Roads. Still a little bit too early to get into the specifics and throw some numbers on as far as wind gusts and exact amounts of rain, but certainly we'll be fine-tuning that forecast over the next couple of days, so stay tuned. Keep a watch on Thursday into Friday. Those are the action days that we're watching, and of course we'll keep you updated on 13 News Now.